Marketing at Amatec Reading Alloys.
Thank you, Andy. Before I get started, I'd like to recognize both Graham Walker and Apurva Gandhi, who helped me put this together. I'm going to talk about two main areas today. First is production of master alloys, and the second is key master alloy materials used in the production of master alloys, with a focus on vanadium. Master alloys in general are basically a combination of one or two or more metals into an alloy form. They're typically combined with raw materials such as titanium, sponge, and scrap, and used to make a furnace charge. They're usually available as an aggregate material, and process control is very key to deliver the quality needed for both the aerospace and medical industries. I'm not going to go into tremendous detail because there's many variations on this, but to give some pictures to the process, you typically take the master alloy with the sponge, you combine it with scrap, you can use a welded electrode, there's other methods as well. It goes through a melting process and forms the raw ingot that some of the other speakers have already mentioned today. So just to give you some pictures to the process. When you're making master alloys, it's very key to control the process. And a few things I'm just going to highlight here in brief. One, the raw materials used are essential in this process. They have to be certified and come from known sources. We have to use refractory-free process to melt these materials to ensure cleanliness for aerospace components especially. These are ignited in a vessel, they're refined, they're cooled and cleaned, but the key is control of the supply chain, control of the inspection all the way through the process to ensure a final product that meets the needs of our customers. I'm not going to go into much detail here because one of the prior speakers mentioned this, but vanadium master alloys basically cover about 80% of all shipments, with moly being around 10% and niobium and the specialty ones to follow. The one thing I think you can point out here is that there are many variations in master alloys beyond the main vanadium grades, and it's very easy to customize them if needed. So the key thing for the master alloy production is having a robust quality relationship with your suppliers. There has to be certification of raw materials, comprehensive understanding of high density inclusions and how to avoid them, risk prevention strategies, and comprehensive inspection methods. And there's always a robust audit process that's involved with this. And typically, you'll find that the suppliers work very closely with the melters and end customers to achieve that. I'm going to spend a little bit more time now on the raw materials. I think that's more important. So, as one of the earlier speakers did a nice job mentioning, there are really key raw materials used in the production of master alloys. The three key ones I'm going to highlight today are the aluminum powder, we'll start with that. That's a pure metal powder. It's purchased in very high purity form. It's commercially available, and it's used as a master alloy addition. It's also used as the fuel for the exothermic reaction that we use to make the master alloys. This is produced by several good suppliers around the world, and it's commercially available, and there really is no concern about getting this material, but we always are working to qualify new supply sources. The one in the middle, the orange material, is vanadium pentoxide. This is used as the oxide form, and it comes from various ways, but the most common way is a high vanadium rich ore is concentrated and refined and roasted into vanadium pentoxide or vanadium trioxide. It's mostly used for ferrovanadium, and the earlier speaker from Roskell really showed where it's used. Only a small fraction is used for the titanium melting industry. And then, likewise, moly trioxide is the primary material used for moly containing master alloys. It's similar to the vanadium oxide story. It's again concentrated from ore, refined, and then sold to industry. The steel industry does use the majority of this material, and master alloys are a minor use of it, but high purity moly trioxide is essential for our industry. The price charts I wanted to show you here are interesting. I just showed for vanadium and for moly. These are both the actual oxide, not the ferrovanadium or ferromoly, and they're a bit longer than the ones we saw a bit earlier. As you can see, let's start with the green one, which is the moly trioxide. It's been pretty well behaved in the last couple of years, although prices have been drifting up. But I put the earlier history in from the early 2005 to 2008 period when those prices went crazy. At the time I was working in the steel industry and there was actually shortages. So right now it's been behaved, but we have to keep an eye on the supply and continue to work with new suppliers, as already mentioned. We're going to focus more today on the vanadium pentoxide market. Again, you can see there's been earlier periods of volatility, especially price excursions above $20 or $30 in both 2005, 2008, and then again last year. The other thing of note is the period of stability in the middle was relatively stable, but also had a period where the price dropped precipitously, driving the market, and that affected our industry clearly. So a little bit more about that. You know, this last year has been very crazy, and one, we know that there's been supplier churn because suppliers have exited the market prior to this run-up. The China rebar regulations, which were mentioned a bit earlier, have been a very important factor in the run-up this year, and there has been talks about the vanadium redox batteries. So let's get into it a little bit more. I've basically gathered some information from several different public sources here, and we'll review them now. So this nice study from a couple years ago shows that the vanadium is primarily used, more than 90% of it is in the steel industry. And only about 4% is used for titanium production. And the supply of the raw material, the vanadium, is 70% or more from co-produced steel slag. And it's not totally compatible for our production processes that we need for our quality. So we primarily rely on primary vanadium ore suppliers and some secondary sources. So we're limited in how much we can actually take from the supply market. And that actually is a key thing we have to watch out for and can drive volatility in our prices. This study is actually from Bushveld, and this shows the strong correlation between steel production and vanadium demand and consumption. And I think what's interesting to note here is if you look in the out years during the forecast period ahead, it's a very, a growth rate is applied very stably. And we can deal with that. But the reality is if you look back a couple of years around 2014, when steel production spikes, demand for vanadium spikes, and that drives the vanadium pentoxide price. So that's where you have to watch both supply, demand, and price dynamics. And unfortunately, since the steel drives this and not titanium, we are not really in the driver's seat of pricing. The other thing that this study mentions, and you'll see a little study a little later on, that the China rebar standards will drive vanadium demand up by 10 to 15% over the next few years. High purity vanadium is also something we have to keep in mind. When you see a lot of the published indices, it's for either ferrovanadium or vanadium that's not high purity. This work by Largo, an industry supplier, in 2008 showed that 2018 there was about 90,000 tons of vanadium supply. About 9% of that production was for high purity vanadium, and about half of that is used in the aerospace industry. So we're taking about 4,000 metric tons of high purity vanadium each year. So again, we won't drive the demand, but we do have a premium product and we tend to pay more for our premium product. So I think we do have some market power, but we don't control the underlying commodity price. A little bit more on the China rebar, and I think this is something we have to watch very closely. The regulations have been enacted. They are coming online. Demand is going up. The one dynamic I think we're seeing, though, is that the demand of vanadium is up in China, but their overall economy has been soft, so total steel tonnages have been down this year. So again, it's a constant thing we have to watch as an industry. But overall, the macro trend is for more pull on vanadium worldwide. This study is interesting. This came out in August by CRU, or excuse me, April. And it's actually proven so far not to be true. They predicted earlier in the year that stocks of vanadium would go down, and by correlation, the price would go up. But as I just mentioned, I believe that the weaker demand in China has kind of softened that. The other thing that this study highlighted, and we all have to watch, is we use niobium in many of our master alloys and our titanium alloys. And one of the main things you can substitute vanadium in steels for microalloying is niobium. It doesn't work as well, but you can substitute niobium. And so we have to watch the niobium market very closely as well. We do not want to be caught in a crisis or short niobium, because that's becoming a more and more important alloy used in aero engine titanium grades. One of the earlier speakers also mentioned vanadium redox flow batteries. This is a real technology. It works just fine, and it uses a large amount of dissolved vanadium. And you won't see them in a car anytime soon. They're very heavy. I put the picture in here to show that these are large-scale installations, but they do work very well. These installations are interesting, and I think will be a component of green energy over the next coming decade because of wind farm and energy produced by solar power. But they use quite a bit of vanadium, and their use or selection for use is controlled by the vanadium price. They typically cost 20 to 50% of the system cost is vanadium. And if vanadium prices are high, the engineers will tend to use a lithium-ion based system versus the vanadium. Again, it's an area we have to watch as an industry to see the supply side dynamics. On the supply side, there's been a lot of activity. There's actually a very nice, very long Seeking Alpha vanadium miners news that's published on a regular basis. The one from August listed 11 separate vanadium projects worldwide under review. Now, most of these won't produce high purity vanadium pentoxide, but will drive the supply into the market. 6 of them are in Australia. There's 2 in Canada, 2 in the US, and 1 in South Africa that are under active development. Now, they all probably won't come to market, but it is something we have to watch. Of course, Largo has mentioned that they've expanded their mine in Brazil by 25%, and that's online, and they're already supplying the industry quite well. US Vanadium made the deal with Everest Stratcor, and they're coming online and doing a great job. And then we see Energy Fuels, which is a supplier out in the western USA that's coming online, and again, working towards being a good supplier to the titanium industry. So this is just a snapshot. There's a few others that, for time, I didn't add in there, but we have to watch both the supply and demand side. And so just to conclude, China, just like the earlier speaker mentioned, is going to drive the demand of vanadium and also the price. So we have to watch that very closely. New capacity is entering in the market, and master alloy suppliers have to be continuously looking for new supplies of high quality demand, and we are. The rebar mandates and also the flow batteries can create additional demand, which we have to watch closely. Especially, the key thing is also the government regulations around greenhouse gases and energy production. And the market's going to continue to be a complex puzzle that we have to watch and will drive uncertainty. And I think the key takeaway is that as an industry, we have to work together on strategies to mitigate the risk of supply disruptions and strategies to mitigate the risk of price volatility through the supply chain. With that, I'm going to close and thank you.